Good evening and welcome. My name is Paul Amos, and I'm the founder of The Redeemed. The Redeemed is an organization that was built so that men of all types could come together in an open format where we could speak about the problems that men face and at the same time the triumphs that we have over those problems. Tonight, we're here for a part of our series called Pursuing Restoration. This is an online live format. For many people, an opportunity to hear it both now live and also after the fact through our podcast and webcast. And we just thank you for taking the opportunity tonight to come be with us, to listen to our great speaker, and to hear the message that we believe resonates among all men, and a chance for them to hear about true leadership, not just leadership in the way it's taught today, but leadership in the way that it's been taught 2,000 years ago. We tonight are very blessed to have a very special speaker, someone that I've had the opportunity to be mentored by and learn from. He is former Georgian of the Year, former CEO and chairman of Synovus Corporation, but is a mentor and a person who has been out to so many different people. Please welcome Jim Blanchard, and today we're going to kick it off by asking him to talk a little bit about what his view on servant leadership is.
Well, thanks, Paul. Great to be here with you. I've been excited about this, to have an opportunity to know more about the Redeemed and know more about the organization itself and the good work you're doing, and I commend you for it.
Well, thank you very much.
It's such a great thing that you have made available to men who want to have a group to support them and to learn and to find freedom.
Yeah.
And I'm just excited to be with you tonight. I love talking about servant leadership. It's a subject that, quite frankly, I don't pretend that I'm an expert on the subject, but I've learned a lot about it, and I'm learning more and more every day. Mm-hmm. I read the books about it, I listen to the speakers about it, but I found that the truth is that I find more about the subject of servant leadership in the Bible mm-hmm. than I do anywhere else. And the greatest role model of all was Jesus Christ when he was doing his ministry here for the 3 years that he engaged in active ministry before his crucifixion, before his death, and then his resurrection. Ken Blanchard, who is a great author on the subject of servant leadership and the broader subject of leadership, says that Jesus is the greatest role model of servant leadership ever. He's written a book called Lead Like Jesus.
Yeah.
And Ken says that he really had let his Christian life kind of get away from him. He'd grown up with it. It became less important. And a friend kept urging him to regain his grasp of the Christian faith. And he just wasn't interested. And finally the friend said, "Do me a favor, read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John again." And Ken says, when I read the Gospels, I realized that Jesus did everything that I had ever written about and ever spoke about.
Wow.
And it turned him back to the Lord. And so I think that's the power of the gospel, and I believe it's the power of the practice of servant leadership. Servant leadership to me is simple. It is serving others rather than being served. Rather than being the boss, and rather than telling everybody else what to do, you actually are taking on the responsibility of empowering the people, enthusing the people, equipping the people, giving them the confidence to act on their own, giving them the confidence to use their own brain power to respond to the needs of the customer. Mm-hmm. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Ken also says, and I'll quote him several times because he's just such a great friend and also such a great advocate of servant leadership. He says that the typical pyramid of leadership is the CEO's at the top, the pyramid goes down, and all the workers that deal with customers on the bottom. Mm. And he said, what you need to do is turn the pyramid upside down. Mm. And in that sense, the CEO's at the bottom. Now, he's still the CEO, but in importance, in his role, his job is to prepare all the people in the pyramid, particularly these in the broad part of the pyramid at the top, to better serve the customers. And he says, if you turn the pyramid upside down, it's the customer service people, the sales people, the support people. It's the people that they're the ones that make all the money. Mm. And the CEO and the executive team are the ones that spend it all. And they're the bureaucrats. And yet in most organizations you got junior level bureaucrats calling up CEOs of units out there in the field that are making all the money, telling them what to do, telling them how many people they got to get rid of, how many people they can hire. Some of them even take the responsibility away from the CEO out in the field, the divisional CEO, and they tell them who they can hire. They got to send them down to HR at headquarters to get somebody that they know they want to put in the team. So, and what Jesus said, and this is the model again, is I came to serve, not to be served. And so that's the essence of servant leadership.
Well, thank you for sharing that. You know, when I hear you talk about flipping the pyramid and putting the frontline workers at the top and yourself at the bottom, how do you go about doing so with the traditional model of leadership being top down? How do you go about setting the example to the workers that allows them to feel comfortable with you on the bottom of the pyramid?
Well, it's a question of trust, and you have to earn it. You have to earn trust in any relationship. But in the business environment, a CEO that truly practices servant leadership can quickly earn the trust because a lot of things. You give them the right to take a risk and be wrong. Mm. You give them the right in a meeting to speak their mind, even if it's contrary to what their boss had to say previously. You give them the right to use their own initiative. You give them the right to make a deal with a customer. If the product is bad, take it back, even if the tag doesn't necessarily prove that it came from this store. Mm. I mean, I remember back in the days, the glory days of Rich's in Atlanta, brother, they'd take anything back. Mm. I mean, you bring in a pair of blue jeans you bought down at the nearly new store, they'd take that back. And people would say, how do you do that? I mean, you got to be losing money. They said, the amount of money we lose on that is insignificant compared to the gratitude and the appreciation and the loyalty that we get from our customers. So it's trust, and I think a CEO that practices this and encourages the leadership team to practice this has to have a lot of self-confidence. They can't be insecure in their own skin. They have to realize that everything isn't going to get done exactly by the way I would have done it myself. Mm-hmm. he or she has to set up a system of accountability, and then also, Paul, they have to make sure that they have some sort of systematic way of making sure that some major decision that could affect the reputation of the entire company is not made without the approval of some higher official. Mm-hmm. And the way I always described that was, I'm giving you the gun, I'm giving you the bullets, but I'm not giving you a cannon where you can shoot a hole in the boat and sink it. And so, there are parameters, but when people know they're free to use their own judgment and their own brain within the widest range of issues, there's unlimited amount of ingenuity, creativity, energy. The more micromanagement's done, the more that comes top down, the more, vision has to be top down. Pay and compensation generally has to be top down. But the broad area of customer service, sales, and even production in the manufacturing side, so much of it is done so much better when people are empowered to use their own abilities and not necessarily have to go to the rule book. I would suggest to you that the more rules you have in an organization, the more process, the more procedures, the more controls, the less oxygen there is in the air.
That's fascinating. When you think about post-financial crisis, the government wanted to put in all types of rules, processes, procedures around the banking institutions and financial institutions that you worked in, but more broadly around corporations in general. Do you find that those processes and procedures are hindering what we're seeing in terms of the success of helping empower workers through a servant leadership perspective?
I don't think there's any question about it. One, the government has no expertise whatsoever in how to run a business. If we ran our businesses the way they run the government, we'd all be broke, like the government is.
Yeah, that's true.
The government has the great benefit of being able to print money. But since the meltdown, and that's an interesting point you make, I'm not critical of bank examiners and bank regulators. I think they used the meltdown of '08 to take the most control over the banking industry that's ever been taken before in the history of this country. And I think it has not been a good thing, but they were so protective of their own reputation. They got criticized by the Congress so badly for the meltdown that occurred in the financial industry that they went way overboard, reached way too far, and in some ways, again, I'm not being critical of them in some way, because we're all subject to overreacting in a crisis. But I think in some ways they have literally nationalized the banks. Now, they don't own them, but they do have more control over the operation of them than they've ever had before.
When I think about the parallel to Jesus' days, the Sanhedrin and everybody else became so legalistic.
Yes.
And they became a set of rule followers that always wanted to adhere to specific things. And Jesus came along and gave a very different message about love and the heart. And it is fascinating to me to see how those messages tend to resonate with people and humans, because that's the relationship God wants us to have with Him.
Yes. That's awesome. Well, it was the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin and the rule makers that actually crucified Jesus. And so that kind of thing still happens today. I mean, it's a lot of people that go to work every day that dread having to go. I have an example I'll give you. I saw a prayer request at a church a number of years ago from a lady who was asking for prayer, and she basically said that I have been beaten down so badly. I hope the Lord will order my steps away from this job and get me out of bondage and get me some freedom. I saw another note from a lady who had been a 35-year plus employee of a company that said, the reason I have been here for 35 years is I have been taken so well care of by this company, and I feel so loved. Now, I'll tell you a story. I don't know that I've ever told this story publicly, but Barron's magazine was interviewing Bill Turner and me 25 years ago, and Bill Turner made the comment, yeah, the secret to this place here is love. And the lady said, yeah, but I mean, what is a business term for that? He said, oh no, it's love. And she said, no, I mean, how in business would you describe that? And he leaned over and he said, lady, it's love. And love is a word that people know, workers know, employees know, even executives at the highest level and CEOs know, but so often they don't think that has any place. And I operate a servant leadership kind of an approach on the basis that every person that you deal with may not remember the details of the lecture you gave them, but everybody that works in your company knows how you make them feel. And I think that's the epidemic that servant leadership cures. It's that epidemic that, command and control, harshness, manipulation, secrecy, all the things that exist so often in a top-down organization are remedied when you love people, you appreciate them, you recognize them, you reward them, you give them the dignity of the workplace, and people can't wait to get there and go to work. Another example, you hear it all the time, particularly with our proximity to Fort Benning. He is a soldier's general. And of course, that's what that means. The troops think, this guy, he has my back. He loves me. He really cares for me and my family. He's thinking about me every time something is going on, not just about his own convenience. And so soldiers that work for that kind of general will take the hill. They'll put their own life in jeopardy. And people in banking and insurance and whatever business it is will do the same thing for the leader that they know has my back and really appreciates the effort that I make.
How do you ensure some level of accountability for people who, want to take that too liberally? I think about just you mentioned a general but I think about a coach's, player's coach.
Yeah.
And there has to be a balance between the players feeling that the coach loves them and also the players being accountable to the coach.
Right.
How did you as a coach for your organizations ensure not only that they understood the love, but they understood they were accountable?
Yeah. Well, I'll be just brutally frank with you. I used to, when talking about the culture, I'd talk about it for an hour at some meeting. And then I would say, now we're going to spend the next 5 minutes going over the numbers from last quarter. And we'd do it. And then I'd say to them, I want y'all to understand that I'm here to make sure that you are maximizing your opportunity in your career here. And that's what this culture is all about. The love, the caring, the expectation of being appreciated. But I want you to know this. If we don't make our numbers, you're not going to have me to be talking to you. Okay. It's going to be somebody else. Well. And so you can have the greatest servant leadership atmosphere that's possible and still be the highest performer in your sector. People don't mind working hard. They don't mind having high targets. They don't mind climbing up a mountain on their knees and being bloody to get there. What they can't stand is when they're mistreated, they're unappreciated, they're not treated with dignity, and they go home and sulk and want to sleep in the next morning because they hate to go back.
Well, you mentioned talking for an hour about culture, and I know that you have an incredible reputation as a storyteller. And Jesus came and in order to be able to speak to the masses, he used stories and analogies all throughout his. Yeah. I was curious if you could give us one or two of your favorite stories that kind of exemplify how servant leadership works.
I'll paraphrase them.
Okay.
They're probably too lengthy to squeeze them in for our short period of time we have. But the first one is the story of the couple that went to see the president of Harvard. And they had lost a son in Europe, and they wanted to do something in his memory. And the president of Harvard kind of was abrupt with them. He looked at them and didn't think probably they were very capable of helping him very much, certainly not make a big donation. And he kind of brushed them off and was abrupt and not rude, but not courteous either. And so finally the lady asked, what does this entire university cost? And he stated some multi-million-dollar figure. And she said, oh, we can do much better than that. And she turned to her husband and said, come, dear, I have an idea, and they left. And the following year, the president of Harvard learned that the couple, this is in 1888, had donated $47 million to a new university to be known as Leland Stanford University.
Wow. What a powerful example.
Is that a powerful example? There's a person who was too busy to be kind. He was too important to be courteous. He judged them by their appearance to be, modest at means. And my conclusion about that story is there never should have been a Stanford. There should have been twice as much Harvard. And then the second story, a little shorter, is the clerk in the hotel that was sitting there one night on a stormy night in New York City. And a couple came in, elderly couple, and they said, we can't find a room, as every hotel's filled, and it's a stormy night, and is there any chance that you got a room? And the clerk said, we don't have a room, but I can't turn a couple like you out on a night like this. Would you like to stay in my room?
Huh.
And so the couple did, and the next week or two, he got a letter from the couple. And in the letter, he said, "You are the kind of person that ought to be running one of the great hotels in the world, and I intend to build it for you." And a year later, he invited them to come down to a street corner, and he said, "This is the hotel that I've built for you to run." And William Waldorf Astor turned the hotel over to John C. Bolt, that young clerk. And the hotel, it was the greatest hotel in the world at that time, the Waldorf Astoria.
Wow, between the brands of Stanford and Waldorf Astoria, those are amazing stories.
Is that an amazing story? That's the example of command and control, too busy to care, and the heart of a giver, the heart of a servant. And and I always ask the question, and I'll ask you, do you think that man gave up that hotel room of his because he thought he might get some reward for it?
Certainly not.
Of course not. He didn't expect a thing out of it. He gave it up because he had the heart to give it up. And Ken Blanchard says, again quoting Ken, that no change takes place in the workplace or in the home until there is a change in the heart. Mm. And so I've done it myself most of my adult life. I've tried to teach people about that if you really examine yourself and are honest with yourself, what heart change do you really need to become a servant leader? And it's really the most important. Next to, am I prepared to be a total follower of Jesus? The second most important question probably is, what heart change do I need? And it probably addresses the very essence of what the redeemed is all about, because that's how I see redeemed, is the born-again experience when a person makes Jesus the Lord of their life. And they're redeemed from the pit of hell to eternity in heaven.
So many people don't realize redemption is theirs whether they want it or not.
Yeah.
Jesus, by coming and being on the cross, and God by providing us that opportunity, we're already redeemed. And so one of the key messages that we're trying to send to people is that all you have to do is embrace it, to reach out, to open your heart to it, just like you're saying, open their hearts to the type of leadership that Jesus came to be with.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that some of our audience may be grappling with, you as the leader and the boss could set the tone.
Yeah.
But many of them come from jobs that aren't necessarily at the top of the pyramid or the bottom of the pyramid, as you've said. How do you, as middle management or as a person working in a larger organization, set that example without violating the rules that may be in place that are different or counter to that culture?
Well, let me say this, Paul. I am so glad you asked me that question, because we hadn't talked about that question before. Because that's the number one question that I've been asked all around at the universities, with the MBAs, at other places other than internally at Synovus. People say, that just sounds so good. And of course, most of these people in my introduction in these speeches were told that Synovus was named the number one place to work in America by Fortune magazine. And there's no question in my mind that servant leadership is why. But the number one question is what I do. That doesn't exist at my job. And the answers I've given over the years are, one, try to do it in your department. Try to do it in your squad, in your, in the defensive line room. Mm-hmm. And if it violates the rules and it's not, or you're reprimanded because of your approach, then my recommendation is this: there are too many good companies to work for one that's going to suppress you being kind, nice, gentle, appreciative, respectful. And if that doesn't fit, there's a better place to be.
Sure. Well, we've spent a long time talking about working and being at the job site, but in a lot of ways, Jesus' principles of servant leadership apply to the home and apply to fathers and husbands. And maybe you could just spend a minute talking about the role of men outside of the workplace and how servant leadership impacts that.
Yes. Well, there's no question in my mind that the servant leadership principles apply in the home just as well as, or better, than they do in the office. Because God has a order for the family. And He's put the husband in a position of authority. He's not the boss. He's not greater than the wife. But he has, God's order is that he's been given the authority in the family, and he shares it, he consults, he's not stingy with it. And the servant leadership approach is by far the best way to mold a happy union between a husband and a wife. And also to raise the children. I mean, the children, what they're looking for is nurturing. They're looking for being well taught. They're looking for boundaries. They're looking for guidelines. They may not know they're looking for them, but even teenagers that have not had that kind of feel like they're safer when they've got boundaries that are imposed by the parents. But people talk about self-esteem. The best way for a child to come out of their youth and like going to college is to feel good about the fact that they are generally living a good life and doing the right thing and honoring their parents and being obedient to their parents' wishes. That doesn't imply some command and control approach. This may apply more to the workplace, but the old notion is that a command and control, the boss, the guy that imposes his authority in his office or his position or hers, we used to say in Synovus that person salutes the flag and then kicks the dog. and that implies you kiss up to the higher ups, then you go back to the office and beat the heck out of the people that work for you. And it's an awful way to be. It makes it's so transparent to the people that are under that kind of authority. So therefore, I believe that those same principles apply to the husband who has authority from the Lord. The couple have authority over the children. And if you live by that order, then you're following the way God ordained it. And it just works out better. It certainly applies in the family.
What a powerful example and way to talk about not just what happens at the work site, but also what's happening at home with the family.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It has meant a tremendous amount to me, and I believe it's meant a tremendous amount to our audience. Thank you for coming and talking about servant leadership. To everyone at home, I want to take a moment and say thank you for listening in. To our listeners and to our viewers, whether you're on Crowdcast, Instagram, Facebook, we thank you for clicking in today. We're going to have another wonderful session next month talking about financial freedom and the principles that Jesus has around keeping our finances and helping us deal with financial brokenness. We ask you to tune in. Please follow us on social media, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Good night.
So one addendum to our conversation is that often I'm asked, this sounds kind of soft, kind of fluffy, maybe a little permissive. It goes back to your question about, sometimes you have hard decisions you have to make and that type of thing. There's no question about that. Accountability, performance, and there's a lot of tough love that goes with servant leadership as well. It's not just some open-ended, easy living kind of deal. I mean, it requires discipline as well. And the best story I've ever heard about tough love is Bear Bryant when he was on a recruiting trip for a young man in high school, and he went into the living room of the young man's home with the young man's mother, and the boy was kind of snippy to his mother, and he spoke over her a couple of times, and after about the third instant of him being somewhat rude to his mother, Bear Bryant got up and reached over and got his hat and put it on top of his head and started walking toward the door. And the young man stopped and he said, Coach Bryant, don't leave. I want to talk to you about it. I want to play football at Alabama. And the coach stopped, took his hat off, turned around and looked at the boy, and he said, young man, a boy that is not respectful of his mother can't play football at the University of Alabama. Wow. And he left. And he didn't recruit this 5-star athlete. So you have to dismiss people from time to time. It's the most unpopular thing in business. Mm-hmm. You have to discipline people from time to time. You have to draw parameters sometimes for people who just abuse their latitude that they've been given. So there's nothing permissive or soft about servant leadership. It boils down to, how does that person feel about me as a boss, this company as a place to work, and do they want to get up in the morning and come down here and go at it again? And that is dictated basically by how the person feels that they are treated. And do you have my back, and do you really care about me as a person? So nothing soft about it.